Did we do it? Is that it? Title card, baby. Let's go. We did it. All right. First things first. The bottom center of the screen says that we have beaten 38 games in 2024 and 485 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are lies. We've now beaten 39 games in 2024 and 486 since we started doing this. Let's go. Okay, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of Howard. God, you just played this game for 10 hours, Nick. Come on. Harold Halibut. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons. And there are many of both. So first of all, first and absolutely foremost, the by far best thing about this game, and the only thing that really makes it notable, is the art style. The stop motion style, almost Thunderbird's puppet kind of animation, or like Team America if you want to be 21st century about it, kind of animation almost, is something that we've seen in film many, many times before, but we have never really seen it, as far as I know, in a video game. And I don't know how long it took to make this game. I don't know exactly what the process was. It says they keep calling it a handmade game. That can't be entirely true, but I'm curious to know how true it is. But regardless, this must have been, just from a directorial standpoint, a Herculean effort to put something like this together. And the value of that is not lost on me. If nothing else about this game were valuable at all, this game has a place in the video game zeitgeist just for the way it looks. That by itself is enough to give it value. Enough value to play. Enough value to spend my time on, I think. At least sometime. We'll get to that in a second. So that's by far and away the most important positive thing about this game, is that it is gorgeous. It doesn't look like a video game at all. It looks like you are playing a stop motion clay animation game. And when you get a good close look at some of the faces and stuff, you can see the textures in their hair and on their skin and on their clothes, and it is sublime. That part of the game is incredible. It really is. And I imagine it took a long time to make this game. And I appreciate the effort that it took to pull that look off. That is really something. Really? Secondly, and by far distant second, but also good, was the story. I mean, this is a narrative game, if you want to call it. It's not quite visual novel, and it's not quite walking sim. As far as what kind of game this is, it's got some walking. It's not really a video gamey game. It doesn't even really have many mini games or anything like that. But the narrative drives it, and the narrative, while maybe not perfect, because it's got some big, long, slow points in the middle and in the beginning, is ultimately very satisfying, especially toward the end. This game threw a lot at me in the story that I was like, why are we spending time on this? This is dumb. Why are we dealing with this? And then by the end, or during certain parts in the middle, I would be like, oh, okay, that's why we spent some time on this. That makes sense. The game ties up, especially at the end, it ties up very nicely. It's the story is good. It's well written. It's well voiced all the way through. Well, it's definitely well voiced. We'll talk a little bit more. The writing's not bad. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But it's definitely well voiced, and it is the way that it resolves is very satisfying, and it's an interesting story to a degree, but definitely the way that it ends is it's a good ending. It's a nice ending. Not like I'm not necessarily saying it's a good ending, but it is a satisfying ending the way that it ends. You know. Those are the two main things that really stood out as far as what makes this game good. There were some things that were middling. I think the writing had moments where it was very good and moments where it wasn't that good at all. Some of the writing, I feel like it was missing a tone of like cleverness, or it could have been funnier. I mean, it was trying. This game is quirky. That's the best way to describe it. It is a quirky game full of quirky characters. It's all quirks. And that's fine. And the game is very effective at being quirky, being weird and abnormal and just outside of the box, out of the mold. Quirky. But a lot of times with quirky comes hand in hand with like whimsical, funny, sharp, witty. There was some of that, but there was also a lot of dialogue where it's just kind of, they're just getting the plot out, kind of. And the characters, none of the characters in the game seem particularly intelligent. None of them, especially the main character. You know, I recognize that that's part of the point, but the game is just kind of full of just kind of regular people. There are plenty of intelligent people. There's like scientists or whatever, but they're not like clever. You know, they're not really. Some of the characters just aren't that interesting. Some of the main characters, they're just not very interesting. They're just very normal. You know, so I think some of the writing kind of was. I think it could have been better. It's not bad, but I think it could have been better. And you know, I think that's the main thing as far as like what was kind of middle ground. There were some things about this game that I think were objectively bad. 1.51% of people have gotten this far. Awesome. I think there were some things about this game that were objectively bad. Well, let's get the basic one out of the way. The game crashed 3 times on me, and one of those times I lost about 20 minutes of progress. I'm playing this at launch. That kind of thing happens. And I always give a game a pass for the first one, but it happened 2 more times. So they need to address the crashes. That was disappointing and jarring and immersion breaking. But I'm not going to hold that too much against them. Games crash sometimes, especially new ones. They'll probably patch it, or if they don't, it's not the end of the world, right? The game has a fairly generous autosave system, so I only lost progress 1 time, and it wasn't the end of the world. Another thing about this game that I think could be better, and this is kind of at the core of why I don't love this game as a whole, and that is the pacing. The pacing is so slow. This game is a slow burn. It is a very slow game, and the fact that there were like 15% of people, and I played it 4 days after it came out, 15% of people made it. 15% of people that started this game made it through Chapter 1. That's not great. And the reason is that Chapter 1 is very slow. It takes 3 hours for this game to really get going. And, 2 hours. Let's say 2 hours for the game to even... Well, it takes about 2 hours for the game to even really start... For you to really start understanding what the game is even about. And it takes another hour after that for things to actually start to move. It really takes its time. This game took me, I think, about 8 hours. That's a guess, but I think it took me about 8 hours to beat it. So a little bit shorter than the how long to beat time. I did nothing but main story only. There is a lot of side content in this game, it seems, which is great. I don't have a problem with that. Side content is fine. But this game is too long, is what I'm getting at. This game, for the kind of game that it is, 8 hours is too long. How long to beat says 10. I beat it in only 8. That is too long for a game, for a narrative adventure like this, where there's no RPG gear elements, and that's fine. I've played a lot of games that I've really enjoyed that don't have any RPG elements or inventory screens or whatever. There's no inventory. There's I think 3 mini games in the whole thing, and they're all brain dead easy and take about 10 seconds. They're short and basic enough that you can't even really call them puzzles or whatever. They're just something to do for a second. Outside of those few times that all add up to maybe a minute and a half total in the whole game, outside of that, all you are doing in this game is talking and getting the story, or you are walking from one place to another doing errands. That is really most of what you are doing in this game. Is like you go and find someone, you have a conversation, some of the plot comes out, and then they say, okay, now you need to go to this place to meet this person. And you go, and it takes 2 or 3 minutes to get there, and then you have a conversation with that person. And that is the whole game. That is the whole game. So 60% of the time I was playing this game, well, not quite that much. 60% of the time I was playing this game was probably just dialogue. Just story. The other 40% was just walking from one place to another. Here, I think, is the core issue of what's wrong with this game. It should have been a film. Now, I recognize that if you made this into a film, the idea of the way that it looks loses some of its novelty, because there have been lots of films that have looked like this. But that being said, if it wants to stand on its own 2 legs just based on the story and the writing and the voice acting and all that stuff, it shouldn't matter, right? If I had watched this as a movie and it were 2 hours long and all of the bullshit was cut out, all of the walking and blah blah blah, and it was just the story, I think I would have quite enjoyed this game as a film, just if it were a movie. I think I would have really enjoyed it. I think I would have said, people should watch this movie. It's really cool. It's got a great story. The art direction's interesting. It's very cool. It's a very quirky movie, and I would have liked it fine. I would have quite enjoyed it. As a game, if you're going to make a game like this, you better cut it down to like 5 hours max for a game like this. If all it is narrative, nobody. Let me posit this to you. If there's if the idea of this being a 2-hour movie sounds really cool to me. It sounds like it'd be a really cool, interesting movie, very quirky, very very unique, very outside of the box. That would have been cool. And then, but if when somebody said, okay, but how about instead it's 8 hours long? Suddenly, I am not interested in watching that movie. Right? And that is what I felt with this. It felt like I watched an 8-hour movie that didn't... No movie has enough plot to carry you 8 hours. Maybe the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You know, there's like very few exceptions, but like outside of something that's like that epic and crazy and insane, this game doesn't approach anything that interesting. So, for this is basically an 8-hour movie, and it's just too long. It's just, there's a bunch of filler. There's a bunch of time that you're just walking from one place to another, and it is boring. It is so boring. There's not even anything you can really do on the way. You cannot be good at this game or bad at it. And again, that's another thing that's indicative of narrative, visual novels and walking sims and narrative adventures, and all that's fine. And I've played several of those games, and I've liked a few of them, but they're all like somewhere from an hour and a half to 4 hours long usually. And some of those even seem like they're a little too long. So this game is way too long. They need to cut. If I could wave a magic wand and make this game better in my eyes, I would cut about 60% out of it. All the walking, and just make it a visual novel. You don't. Why do I have to make it to where I have to walk everywhere and use the tube system? It's not fun. There's nothing engaging in it. I realize that developers want you to like immerse yourself in this world and live in it, and that's fine for a little while, but nobody wants to do that for 10 hours, 8 hours, if that's all that there is. You need some kind of gameplay loop. This game has no gameplay loop. It's just narrative and walking. That's it. That's all it is. So that's my main gripe. It just needed to be a movie, or it needed to be a 3-hour game. And 8 hours is way too long for something like this. aside from that, we talked about the crashes. That's really it. That's really it. I thought, all the stuff with the direction and the cinematography, and I do appreciate how much effort it must have taken to make this thing, but I just think it would have paid off more from a gamer's perspective if it were much shorter, or from a moviegoer's perspective if it were a film. I think this would make a really good film. It's a shame that it's just so boring. This game is so boring. So it's not going to rank well because of that. I mean, there are some things about it that give it flavor and give it value, but at the end of the day, it's a boring game. You get 5 minutes of something interesting and then an hour and a half of fucking, like, I am falling asleep in my chair gameplay. So, all right. But ultimately, it was on Game Pass, so it was worth the money. I don't think it was quite worth the time. I think it was worth about half of the time I spent on it. But I did enjoy some parts of it, and I do appreciate the effort that it must have taken to put something like this together. So, all right, that's it. We have one more order of business. Harold Halibut, thank you for existing. Thank you for allowing us to play you. I do appreciate how much insane effort must have gone into this game. But we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye! Bye, Harold. Thank you. Appreciate you.